everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Well, how's it going, Mom?
Good. Back to podcasting.
We're in a new podcasting place today. We're sitting at Mom's house, sitting at her dining room table. So,
yeah, it's not going to be as quiet as her podcast room.
Yeah, but it's okay. If you hear background noises like a lawnmower or something, just think of it as the sounds of New Orleans, because that's where our episode's going to take place today. So I'm on summer break. I'm a teacher. We can record whenever, but the problem is Jared, my husband, he works from home. And my podcast room is right next to his office. And so Mom and I are like, well, sometimes we get really loud. And so we're like, let's just go to her house. So we're sitting at the dining room table and yeah. So
yeah, it's going to be not as nice.
No, it's perfect. It's actually kind of cool because it's a round table. So we're facing each other, but it's almost like I'm really telling a story to Mom now.
I
know. But yeah, I've quickly learned too, being on summer break, I am not as structured. Like I need that routine I've only been on break. This is my second week, but I'm like, holy smokes, I've got to get a podcast episode out. And then I sit down at home to research and I'm like, well, I could go do this with the house, or maybe I should go plant some flowers or pick some weeds. And I'm like, oh, I've got to sit down. Because I think when I'm in school and I'm teaching, I have that I can't do that. I have to get this podcast research done now. But I'm like, I have all the time in the world, and I don't. It's going by very fast. So, but I think today's episode, today's story that we're going to tell, we're going to break up into 3 parts because there's so much that happens. So we'll have 3 weeks of episodes ready to go.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. Okay, so before we get into today's story, I kind of have 3 things that I want to just quickly discuss to help set up the story. First of all, the episode is called The Fascinating Life and Family of Esther Albano. And Esther Albano is kind of our main person in the story, but she doesn't come into play until a little bit later in the episode. In fact, we might not even talk about her until episode 2. But I just want you to know that everything that we do talk about builds up to the events that affect Esther's life. And so the second thing I want to discuss to help set up this story is the setting. So it takes place in New Orleans. We'll start the story in 1899. So if you think about New Orleans, late 1800s, early 1900s, Italian Americans were not always perceived as prominent citizens, I guess you could say, or even looked upon fondly. And not to pick on New Orleans, because I'm sure it was across the country, or we know it was across the country, but you also have to think we're starting our story in 1899. 8 years prior, in 1891, it was the New Orleans lynching, where 11 Italian Americans were killed, which is America's largest mass lynching in history. So, as we go through this story, just kind of thinking about how Italian Americans were perceived, what Italian Americans had gone through in New Orleans already, kind of keep that in mind as we go through the story. But again, like we said, I think that's how Italian Americans were perceived throughout the country, especially at that time. It's just having that lynching 8 years before we start our story. That's,
It's all happening in New Orleans right then.
Exactly. There was a lot going on for Italian Americans at that time. Okay. And so the third part that I want to just briefly kind of talk about to help, again, set up the story is in the 1900s, like around 1917 to 1919, there was a serial killer in New Orleans, and he was known as the Axeman. And this Axeman would primarily target Italian immigrant families. All of these Italian American families also seem to own grocery stores. So there was this connection there with Italian American immigrants, or Italian immigrants owning grocery stores. And even the 2 victims, I think there was 2 victims that were not Italian Americans, they still owned grocery stores. But primarily he targeted Italian immigrants. So as we go through this story, the Axeman does have a role in the story that we're getting ready to tell. So let's go ahead and start diving into Esther and her family. And so Esther, her real name was Pasquala. I also saw it listed as Pasqualina. Either way, once she came to America, she went by Esther her entire life. So we're just going to call her Esther from here on out, because if you Google her or look her up in the papers, it's under Esther. Esther was born to Giuseppe Jerome Albano, and her mother was Giuseppa. And she was born in March of 1891. She was born in Palermo, Sicily, which is kind of crazy. We were just talking about the lynchings that took place in Louisiana in New Orleans, and that took place in March of 1891.
Oh, same time she was born.
Same time she was born, even
and
same
then they
month.
moved there.
And then they moved there, yeah. And so her family and her, they immigrated to America in 1895, and Esther was one of 8 children. And the family, they settled in New Orleans, and Esther's father, once he came to America, he went by Jerome. And Jerome, he started working on the docks, and he would basically unload fruit that was coming into the New Orleans. The family, though, they did really well. They were able to save a lot of their money. And within 4 short years, they opened up their own grocery store. So pretty good for 4 years.
4 years of just immigrating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back then too.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And so what they did was they bought a building, and they had their grocery store on the first floor, and then the family lived above on the second floor. And Jerome, they were doing well for themselves, but Jerome still needed to work on the docks to make ends meet. They had 8 kids. That's a lot of kids. Jerome, he still worked on the docks. And while he was working on the docks, Josephine would run the grocery store. So not too bad for 4 years. Yeah. Right. And so while Jerome was working at on the docks, he became friends with a Philip Piezzo or Pizzo. I don't know. It was spelled different in different newspapers. 1899 Italian names. It's like a major theme in our podcast is, how are the newspapers going to spell this person's name? Which also makes researching so difficult, because it's like, oh, so now I need to look it up this way, because if one person spelled the last name this way, another person might have done it.
Yeah, they can't pronounce it, so they just spell it out there.
Exactly. They just spell it out, way wacky spellings. Jerome and Philip became friends, and then even Philip and Jerome's children became friends. And the 2 families, they would spend time with each other, have dinners together, those kind of things. This kind of leads into the first crazy event that this family goes through. So... Oh man, this story. So apparently Philip's oldest daughter, Josephine, and Jerome's oldest daughter, Jenny, they became friends, and, they would spend a lot of time together playing with each other, and kind of hanging out. They were the oldest daughters, and so they probably had a lot in common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, sometimes children, they don't always get along.
Just like adults.
Just like adults, yep. They have little tiffs, no matter how good of friends they are. And so apparently one day the girls, they were playing together and they started quarreling. And according to Philip, Jenny slapped Josephine. And, understandably so, Philip was not happy about this. And he went over to confront Jenny and her parents. So he went to Jerome's house. But he kind of took it a little too far. And when he got to the door and he was explaining how he was upset about that, he took off his belt and said that he wanted to whip Jenny.
Wow.
So a little too far there, Philip, but rein it in a little. And of course, Jerome told him to knock it off and, go away. You're not going to whip my kid. It's just not going to happen. And so Philip just took off, headed back home. But as he was taking off, he declared that he would somehow get revenge.
Good grief.
I know. It's like they're kids. Like, sit them down and talk to them. They're going to have tiffs.
Right.
It's like, look at you, man. Like, you're ready to take your belt off here. And so apparently a couple of days went by, and then the 2 little girls started playing with each other. They make amends like kids do, and everything was fine. They were back to normal. So the 2 girls are totally fine. And because of this, Jerome and Philip were like, okay, we'll let bygones be bygones. Let's be friends again. And they worked with each other on the docks. So
yeah,
it's like,
and they're grown-ups.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let it go.
Let it go. And so for a while, everything seemed to be okay with Jerome and Philip. Philip would still even come over to Jerome's house. They would have coffee, talk about their work, talk about life back in Italy. But Josephine, this is Jerome's wife, not Philip's daughter. They had the same name, so that's a little confusing. Josephine, she was still not comfortable with Philip, and she just had that intuition that we get, where it's like, oh, I just don't trust him.
Yeah, that gut feeling.
That gut feeling, exactly. And so she even told Jerome, quote, Philip's visits are not intended for good. So she was not feeling Philip. Yeah. That's kind of funny. Feeling Philip. And she was onto something, because one day when the two men, they were working on the docks, Philip asked Jerome how he was able to become so financially successful. Because remember, they've only been there 4 years. They own a grocery store, bought a home, all of that. So, and I'm not sure how Jerome responded to this question, but as their conversation went on, Philip asked Jerome for a loan of $25 because he wanted to start his own business. And so $25 in 1899 would be about $950 today.
Oh, that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot of money. You know, even though Jerome and his family, they owned the grocery store, I wouldn't say that the family was, quote, wealthy. You know, he still had to work at the docks to make ends meet. So Jerome told Philip that he didn't have that kind of money to loan him. And Philip got upset and didn't believe him. And so the two men, they start to argue, and then the argument turned physical. And so they're out on the docks and the two men are going at it. Like they're kind of wrestling and throwing punches. And then all the other dock workers are kind of standing around watching it. And according to the paper that I read, they're all Italian. So, you know, they're just kind of watching this happen. But then one of the workers saw Philip reach for a knife. And then that's when the other workers, they stepped in and they broke up the fight. I mean, thank goodness, because Philip, he seems to be a little hot-headed. Yeah,
he seems to be like the troublemaker.
Exactly. And so the other laborers, like I said, they were Italian, probably Sicilian. They demanded that the two men make amends and share a glass of wine to repair their relationship. So on the docks, maybe there was a table in the corner, I don't know. They pulled out a bottle of wine, made Jerome and Philip sit down and make amends and have a glass of wine to call it good. And so in Jerome's eyes, after this, everything was fine. Like, hey, we shared our glass of wine. We duked it out. Like, we're done and over with it. And then that night when Jerome went home and told Josephine what happened, she warned him again that Philip is dangerous. You can't trust him. But Jerome was like, no, we're good. We had a glass of wine on the dock. Like, everything is fine. So, but Josephine was right, because Philip was not over their disagreement. So a few nights later, and this incident happens February 14th, 1899, so on Valentine's Day, Josephine, she stayed at the grocery store while Jerome took their oldest son to the parade. This is like Mardi Gras time. Mom and I actually just looked it up to make sure. And so Mardi Gras went from February 10th to the 14th in 1899. And it said that it was the coldest Mardi Gras on record. And I don't know what the average temperature is in New Orleans, but they said the low was 6.
Good grief.
That's really cold. And then Mardi Gras morning, it only warmed up to, what did they say? Mardi Gras morning was 15 degrees and it only warmed to 30 that day. And they had to shovel snow that day as well. So...
wow, I wonder how many people turned out for the parade.
Right, I know, because like I said, I don't know what the average temperature is there, but I feel like those are Colorado temperatures.
Right.
So, but anyways, Jerome and his son, they stayed out pretty late that night. I mean, I think those parades go on through the night. So late that Josephine, she closed up the store. She cooked dinner for the rest of the kids that stayed home. She ended up putting the kids to bed. And then she stayed up for a little while talking with her two brothers. And her two brothers were living with them at that time. And they would actually sleep in the back of the grocery store. So not up on the second floor with the rest of the family.
Oh.
So after her two brothers went to bed, Josephine decided that she wanted to stay up and wait for her husband and son to come home. I think in the grocery store, they had a kitchen that was attached to the grocery store. So maybe they sold, like maybe she cooked things and would sell it at the grocery store too. But on the first floor, there was a kitchen. And
or so, that was their kitchen.
That's true. Oh, that's true. It could have been. Yeah. And then the family would go up and down.
I don't know.
Good point. Because if it has enough room for the brothers to sleep and a grocery store, could have a kitchen on the first floor too.
Yeah, because if it was just one house and they turned the bottom, I don't know.
And grocery stores are not as big as what they are today.
Yeah.
Gotta remember that too. So Josephine just kind of sat in a chair in the kitchen and she eventually dozed off to sleep. So like I said, this parade is going on forever, it seems like, because she's...
Mardi Gras never shuts down.
Never shuts down. It keeps going and going. That's true. So because it was after midnight where Josephine was all of a sudden awoken by a sound at the door. So of course, she's figuring, oh, my husband and son are home. But something bothered her because as she was getting up to go greet them at the door, she hesitated and thought, you know what? I'm going to go get my pistol. And so something didn't sit well with her. So she went and she got her pistol. And then as she was approaching the door and she opened opened the door thinking, again, it was her husband, who was kind of having trouble getting in because she could hear something going on at the door. So she goes over, opens the door, and who does she see standing there? Philip. Uh-oh.
There's that gut feeling.
Exactly. I mean, she didn't trust him from the get-go.
Yeah, what's he doing there at that time of night?
Exactly. And something told her to go get her gun. Once she saw Philip, she tried to quickly shut the door, but Philip slipped his arm in the door and forced his way in. And so when he got in the house, he put his finger to his lips, basically telling Josephine, like, don't make a sound. And so he started walking around the house and basically more of the kitchen. Josephine kind of started moving herself towards the door that led up to where her family was sleeping. So I think what she was doing was putting herself between Philip and her family because she didn't trust him. And then once Philip saw this, he started walking towards her, and Josephine could tell that he had something in his front pocket, like a gun or a knife. And as he advanced towards her, Josephine pulled out her own pistol and she shot Philip once, hitting him in the chest, and then Philip fell to the floor. And once he was on the floor, she continued shooting Philip until the pistol was completely empty.
Wow.
So she was scared.
Right.
So the house, it was close to the police station. So after Josephine was done shooting Philip, she went out into the street to see if she could find a police officer. And interestingly, she said later on, when she opened her door to go out, she noticed that two men were standing right outside her house. And when she opened the door, they took off. So I don't know if they were
Philip's pals,
and he told him to wait outside. Josephine, she was able to flag down an officer, and this officer came into the house and saw that Philip was dead on the floor. And so he took off to the police station to get the captain. So the captain comes over to their house and he brings a sergeant with him. And Josephine, she was standing outside the house waiting for them. And as soon as they came, she just handed him the pistol. And the police officers, they ended up arresting Josephine and taking her and her daughter Jenny to the precinct. And the only reason they took Jenny was so that she could be an interpreter for her mother.
Oh, I was just going to say, what about all the other kids?
Yeah, exactly. And so when Josephine was at the precinct, she told the officers, quote, "He came with two other men to rob or murder me. I was alone with my children. I shot him and he fell. And when he was down, I continued to shoot him." So, she then went on to explain kind of how everything went down, how she then ran out to find the police officer.
Where's her brothers?
No, it is a little weird because it's a direct quote where she says she was alone in the house, but her brothers, we know, were sleeping in the back of the house. But that'll come up a little bit later and we'll figure out what was going on there. Okay, and so during this whole crazy event, Jerome never came home. The son ended up coming home, but Jerome was nowhere to be found. And this got the captain kind of thinking, like, this is a little odd. Where is her husband? And as he started interviewing people and neighbors, they informed him that Jerome never spent a night away from the home. And then the captain, he also took note of what the kitchen looked like. And there's a couple parts in here that make me kind of laugh. And the kitchen is where the shooting took place. And so the captain said that on the table, there were numerous cigarette butts and cigars in an ashtray. And in this captain's mind, he's thinking, well, a woman wouldn't do that, which, right. I mean, I could see where he's probably thinking there were multiple people sitting here smoking at this table, but she did have her two brothers in the house. So maybe they were sitting, smoking cigars and talking before the brothers went to bed. But the captain thought that was odd. And the other thing that he thought was odd was there were a lot of leftover dishes from dinner. He said that he could tell that the family had macaroni, and he said it almost felt like everyone just got done eating. And this is the part that makes me laugh. He explained that this was weird because if the dinner had been served hours before Philip was killed, the dishes would have been cleaned up by then.
Right.
Like
his expectation of a woman.
Exactly, is, she would have the dishes cleaned up.
But he was probably right.
He was probably right. Exactly. Yeah. Especially an Italian woman in her kitchen. She's going to get those dishes done right away.
Right.
So, but yeah, he was like, it feels like people just got done eating and hanging out in this kitchen. He also couldn't believe how almost each shot, so each bullet, hit vital organs in Philip. And he said, quote, "That was unlike a woman. She could hardly have aimed so well." So again, he's like, a woman couldn't shoot that good. Like, there's no way. But all of this questioning is starting to lead the captain to think that Jerome was actually the one who killed Philip and not Josephine. In fact, the captain started thinking that many of the Italian men in the area worked up a plot to kill Philip, who seemed to kind of be a menace to everybody in the area. What the captain thought was that these Italian men lured Philip to the house under the guise that they just wanted him to come over for dinner and kind of just hang out. And so the captain thought right after the dinner, Jerome and possibly another man killed Philip and then took off out of the house, leaving only Josephine. And so the reason that they left Josephine in the house, because they thought, well, Josephine can claim self-defense because she's a woman, she's home alone with her children. And if they say, Josephine, you're going to say Philip broke into the house and that's why you killed him. And this is all the captain's theory. I'm not saying that this is actually what happened. This is just the captain's theory. But his theory kind of starts to take on a little bit more legitimacy, I guess you could say, because when he finally speaks to the oldest son who went to the parade with his dad, the son told the captain that he didn't go to the parade with his father, but instead he went on his own and met up with some friends. So apparently they didn't fill the son in on what their plan was because the son's like, I didn't go with my dad. And so in fact, the son, he came home right after the shooting and saw the police and everything, but he came home alone. Yeah. So I can kind of see where the captain's going. Like a lot of things weren't adding up. Yeah. And so at this point, the captain has Josephine telling him one story. The oldest son is telling him another story. He's kind of starting to second guess Josephine. He's not believing Josephine. And they haven't been able to find Jerome. They have no idea where Jerome is. So that's the other thing. So the captain sends out police officers and they're like, you need to find Jerome and bring him in. We need to talk to him. And so that morning around 9:30, a police officer finds Jerome walking down the street and arrests him and brings him in for questioning. Once Jerome is sitting down with the captain, he tells two different stories to the captain. Now, these stories have some similarities, and I can't help but wonder if some things were lost in translation. But I'll get into what these, because
you got to keep that in mind because
exactly, and I'll get into the two stories right now. But there's some similarities there, and they're not like wildly different. They're just a little bit different. So the first story that Jerome tells the captain is that he went to a parade with a friend, and after staying at the parade for a while, Jerome and this friend decided that they would go back to the friend's house and have a drink. And so, they get to the house, they start drinking, and Jerome gets a little drunk and he doesn't want to go home that way. So he asks the friend, can I just crash at your house? And the friend's like, sure, yeah, no problem. And so the next morning, Jerome gets up and this friend, for some reason, gives Jerome a goat to take home and to feed to his family. Maybe he owed him money or they were trading stuff. I don't know. But, he's like, hey, here's a goat. Take it home and feed it to your family. And Jerome kills the goat at the friend's house and puts it in a bag and starts walking home with a dead goat on his back. Now, I will say, when I was reading this in the paper, they referred to the goat as a kid.
Oh, that's what...
Because that's what they call it.
A young goat.
Yeah, as a kid. And so when I'm reading this, I'm
I know where you're going.
Well, why are we not arresting him? He's got a dead kid in his back. And then it dawned on me that they were talking about a goat. And I was like, this is insane. But it was just a goat. Funny. It really got me. So Jerome is heading home with a bag and a goat, and he gets picked up by the police. And so the second story Jerome tells the police is that he went to the parade alone. And at the parade, he ran into this friend who owed him a goat. And so this friend his name was Antonio. And Antonio insisted that Jerome just come with him right now to get the goat that night. But Jerome said, no, it's not a big deal. I'll just get the goat another day. And Antonio was like, no, come to my house right now. Let's get the goat. And so Jerome is like, all right, fine, let's go get the goat. And so they go to Antonio's house, they sit down, they start having a drink. And apparently this drink made Jerome really sick. And he said, hey, can I just crash here tonight? I'm too sick to walk home with a goat. And so Antonio's like, yeah, no problem. Just stay here. So the next morning he wakes up, he kills the goat and starts home. So you can kind of see like there's some similarities that they're not wildly different.
Right.
So like I said, something might have got lost in translation.
Yeah, he must have talked to two separate police officers.
That's
one
true.
Came up with this story and this one came up with this.
Exactly. That's kind of what I'm thinking happened too. Because, they're not wildly different. But the Captain was still adamant that Josephine was not the killer of Philip. It was Jerome. And this got fueled even further when Philip's widow came into the station, the police station, claiming that she also did not believe that Josephine was the killer, but she instead thought that there was a conspiracy by the Italian men in the area to kill her husband. So the captain is probably like, I knew it. I knew I was right.
Because he's the troublemaker.
Because he's the troublemaker. Philip's the troublemaker. And so she told the captain that that day Philip was killed, a man came to the house asking Philip to join him and some other men at a saloon for some drinks. And so Philip's widow, she said that this was not a normal occurrence. People didn't come over and ask Philip to go out with him. So she thought it was a little odd. And she said that he ended up going. He went to the saloon. And she believes that after the men were done drinking, they went to Jerome's house for dinner. And that's where they took out Philip, was at Jerome's house. This is her theory, though.
Oh, okay.
But the captain's theory and her theory are pretty similar. So the captain is like, yes, I believe you 100%. And so a witness, a neighbor, even came forward claiming that she saw Jerome leave the house immediately after the shooting. So yeah, so this is not looking good for Jerome. And so based on all of this witness statement, his theory, the widow's statement, the captain arrested and booked Josephine on murder charges and Jerome and Josephine's two brothers on accessory to murder.
Oh, there's the brothers.
There's the brothers. And there's a lot of speculation that the two men she saw on the porch were actually her two brothers running off. So
that makes sense.
All speculation, though. This is all,
right.
Josephine has her story and the captain has his story. It's hard to say, but I can kind of see where the captain is like, this is weird. This is odd. But again, weird things happen. Jerome might have had a bad night and not come home. It's hard to say. And they were all held in the city jail without bail. The attorney, though, for Josephine, he asked that for her to be released until a later date, like until they go to trial because of her health. And I'm not really sure what was wrong with her, but I did see in a couple of articles that she was said to be sickly. And so the judge, he initially denied this, but later allowed Josephine to be released on a $5,000 bail. But just Josephine. The men had to stay in jail.
$5,000? And she had that?
Yeah. And what's crazy is $5,000 today is $189,000.
Oh, but if they have bondsman,
yeah,
then that's like 10%.
10%. Yeah. And I also saw in an article, the attorney that she has, well, I think he's the attorney for all of them. He was Italian, and I think he helped out with the bail. I couldn't really verify that, but but yeah, she got out on bail.
Well, I don't really know. That's what the 10%.
No, I've heard that too.
Yeah.
And so I don't.
But that would still be $500.
But yeah, no, that's a lot of money for back then. So I have no idea, but she got out. So and the other thing too is she's got 8 kids at home.
Right.
So, I mean, I think Jenny was old enough at this point to watch the kids, but still, and they have a business and a grocery store. So,
there's a lot going
on there. But a few days after the whole murder happened, the captain, he approached Jerome in prison and said, hey, let's prove that you have an alibi. Take me to Antonio's house where you slept that night. And Antonio, he can vouch for you and say, yeah, he was here. He crashed. I gave him the goat. He killed the goat over there, like whatever. So that kind of makes sense, right? Like,
right. There's his alibi.
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, though, Jerome refused to go.
Wow.
I know. That's weird.
That's just raising your hand saying, I'm lying.
I'm lying. Exactly. Because why wouldn't you? That would prove your innocence.
Correct. Yeah.
So
it'd be over.
So that's an odd thing that's going on right there. But the other thing that I go back to is when he was arrested that morning, he had a dead goat in his bag.
Well, where did he go after the murder?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true. He could have went to Antonio's house
and hung out there, came home with the goat.
And maybe he didn't trust Antonio to lie for him. So that's a good point.
Yeah, that's because he wouldn't have got to Antonio's until
way late.
Which, well, anyway.
That's weird though, huh? But no, that makes sense. He could have went to Antonio's and then still got the goat. So I don't know. It's hard to say. But this did go to trial, and it didn't start until November of 1899. And remember, the murder happened in February of 1899. So Jerome and her 2 brothers were in the city jail for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's a long time. And so during the trial, there were a lot of witnesses that were called, but a lot of them didn't show up and couldn't be found. So, and that's witnesses for both sides. And, there was a distrust at this time of authorities when it came to Italian Americans didn't always trust the authorities during that time.
Oh, that's true.
And so they might've been like, I don't know what to do. I don't trust the authorities. What if I say something and I get thrown in jail? And so I'm sure a lot of it was not ill intended. Like, oh, I'm trying to hide something. A lot of it just might've been out of fear that they didn't go.
Right. I don't want to get involved. Exactly.
Yeah. Like I don't feel like I can trust anything. Now, Philip's widow, she did take the stand a couple of times. And the second time she took the stand, she told the court that she had been threatened numerous times to stop giving testimony and basically said that she just didn't want to testify anymore. So
then that could have happened to all those other witnesses too.
That's true. That's a really good point.
Because she's the major one.
She's the big one, yeah.
And if all these other people saying, well, I saw this, I saw that.
Yeah.
And if they got a threat.
Exactly.
I could see them just saying, okay, I'm done.
No, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. And to be fair, there is a distrust when it comes to Italian Americans trusting authorities.
Right.
Which is well justified. They were not treated well. Let's be honest, though, there is also this thing called the Black Hand that was happening during this time. And mafia and all of that kind of stuff. And that actually comes into play a little bit later. They think a lot of this was done kind of by Black Hand. I don't really buy into that, but there could have been that fear there for these witnesses.
Could have been.
And so, like I said, she just basically said, I don't want to testify anymore. The judge, he stopped the trial and pulled her into his private chambers and told her, look, we need your testimony. And if you give this testimony, we promise that we'll protect you. And she believed him and she agreed and continued her testimony. And so, like I said, there were a lot of witnesses that didn't show. And I think because of this, the entire case and all of the charges were dismissed in December of 1899.
Wow.
Yep. So all 4 were released and free to go home.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't
know what to say.
I don't either.
It's like, of course, they didn't have no proof.
They didn't. And I mean, it was basically the captain's theory
Hearsay.
Against Josephine's story.
That's true.
And if witnesses are not showing up, how can they don't have anything else to prove. I mean, and she was standing out in the yard with the gun. I mean, who knows? It's hard to say what happened, but I think the lack of witnesses is what got everything dropped.
Yeah, because they had a long time to put it all together.
Exactly.
And so they probably figured by then, well, we've done everything we can.
Yeah.
To bring people to this trial.
Exactly.
And
what do? They can't do anything. So I think what we'll do is we'll stop here for today because that was a lot happening. And I think we'll pick it back up and we'll have part 2. And that's when we'll kind of get into Esther. And Esther, remember, is Jerome and Josephine's daughter. And that's she'll sort of be our main person from here on out. So, but I think we've had enough for one episode. If we go on, it's going to be way too much. I like I said earlier, though, I just wanted to tell this story because it kind of just sets up the trajectory of this family's life. It's just craziness upon craziness. Yeah. So, but we hope you enjoyed listening to the first part of the fascinating life and family of Esther Albano. And we hope you come back to listen to the next part. And we'll see you next time.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.